Yeah.
Yeah, follow it tracks.
Oh, that's
So
why.
I was like, I was moving chairs earlier and it was just like following me around the room. It was really creepy. So yeah, it's gonna track. So if you were to move over there, it would like adjust.
Yeah.
It's actually pretty cool. All right, so I don't see.
See Emily again?
I do, but I don't see Joe. We need.
You know, committee member.
We
I'll
do.
call Joe right now.
Oh, there he is.
There's.
Liz
Hi, Joe.
King says it's jiggling.
Did you have trouble getting in?
No.
Oh, you didn't, okay. Just wanted to make sure. Because it was locked, yeah.
Camera is jiggling pretty bad.
It is jiggling.
I wish I had a solution to that. I think maybe it's just gonna take a
It's gonna be
minute
some adjusting.
to settle. I don't wanna adjust
Emily,
or.
if you can hear us, Emily, we can't see you yet, but we will be able to when Christine puts you on the screen. If you hit the chat, Emily, you can hear us.
Oh, she can't see us either.
I think she's like, Emily. Beautiful mask.
Maybe she can see.
I think Sarah's mask is awesome, that's why she said that.
Well, I figured we're
Joe's
gonna be
is
wearing
kind of
these for a while.
conventional. Joe, absolutely.
I actually ordered a whole bunch, like I got a few from the bow tie place.
Oh, I
and
love bow ties.
I just thought
We're gonna have to invest in these, because we're gonna be wearing these for a while. May as well.
that was
May
my,
as well.
my theory.
These are 12, 10 or 12 bucks.
Yeah.
You know, they're not cheap, but they're not that expensive for
Yeah.
a decent thing.
Well, now I try to make sure I have one in every coat pocket, you know, sort of
Yeah.
everywhere, because
I wanna get Joe, Joe's in the picture, right?
So-
I'm the last one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Christy, there's no one on the other side of Joe, and I cannot manually adjust that camera. The camera, it's a smart camera. So it adjusts
Okay,
to
move
where the
over.
people are in the
Yeah.
room, so.
Little one right down. You come a little
So
closer.
the camera has a mind of its own. I'm not gonna.
It says we're good, okay.
Okay, yeah, so this is it, just the four of us in the room. So
Yeah.
everyone can see us, then we're.
All right.
I think we will get started. I said I got a hard stop, so, and Councilor Hightower is ill, unfortunately, and appears to have the flu, not the COVID flu, but the flu. And so she's not joining us tonight. So we will get started. I would take a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second, all in favor? Aye. I'll take a motion to approve the minutes from our November 18th meeting.
Motion to approve the minutes from November 18th.
Second. Aye. Okay. So we will have a public forum on the issues we're talking about tonight. Do we have, I guess we need to have you do your raise hand function. Is that the way we want to do it, Christine? Okay. So if there's anyone who has comment for public forum, if you could raise your hand. And I'll let Christine just take them as she sees to.
And I'll check my emails too.
Okay.
Christy would like to speak. I'll move over now.
Okay.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Christie,
Good to see you all.
you too.
So I'm here to speak on the proposal that y'all have to get the moratorium going for no-cause evictions. I think this is awesome. And with the recent raises in rents the way they have, the housing issues in Burlington are absolutely out of control. This proposal has got to be passed to the city council so that it can get passed. We all know the situation is only going to get worse, seeing the state house is set to be dealing with just cause evictions in January. We have started our campaign for just cause evictions with a lot of support from Burlington's constituents and supporters of this bill at the State House. But if something doesn't get put in place in the meantime, no cause evictions are just going to keep flooding and overloading our courts. We don't need any more homelessness happening in Burlington. And we don't need any more of this backlash either from higher rents. I've been recently told that quite a few tenants in Burlington are receiving rent raises in the amounts of $100 or more. De facto, because just cause evictions campaign has started up again. This is unacceptable behavior. This can't keep happening. The city is not going to survive this. People are just leaving left and right. So I very strongly urge you guys to pass this proposal and get this moratorium put in place before anything more severe happens to the housing situation in Burlington. Unfortunately, the homeless population can't be sustained. They're not being helped now as it is. It can't get any worse. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Other public comment? Do you see Wendy Morgan as a
I don't see Wendy Morgan.
I had suggested about 5:15. So to clarify the just cause eviction statewide temporary proposal, I've invited Wendy Morgan from Vermont Legal Aid, who is working with a coalition of people at the state level to ask for a proposal for at least the next year, effectively looking at just cause, perhaps mirroring. Emily just had a comment. I don't know. She couldn't hear us.
Oh, Emily Higgins can.
Can you check?
No, she just said she called in
Oh, okay.
for her audio.
So the proposal, and I need Wendy to speak a little bit more on it, is, and I'll try to call her in a few minutes if she doesn't come, but is to do something more immediately legislatively. And just to clarify, the city has no authority to independently do a just cause proposal. It has to be legislative. Right now, as we all know, we passed the charter change and it's before the legislature. I had hoped we would have had an update on this before we started, but we're meeting on Monday with some of the Chittenden County legislators and Jamie Feehan, who's the lobbyist for the city, to see where we're at. So I don't have any updates on where we are legislatively. They'll take it up, the GovOps committee will take it up hopefully soon after they start in January, and we're just sort of waiting to hear. And as I said, this proposal from legal aid is they intend to try to introduce quickly as well. I don't know if they're optimistic about the traction on it, but they've got some lead sponsors, so. I don't know, I'm gonna try emailing Wendy. Wendy lives in Peacham, which has no
No internet, really. No broadband.
so she,
No broadband, no.
there's her cell services,
She uses her phone.
Yeah.
Together.
so
That last mile.
the last
They are the
one,
last mile there,
Yeah.
the last 10 miles, they're out there.
so I will try.
I do have one phone call in person. I don't know if that's Emily or what's going on here.
Maybe that's why she'd let you know. That you call in, so you can recognize the number.
I have a number ending in 2302.
And we can come back, I know that Cam is on,
Okay,
Yeah.
Emily says that.
and Emily's on as well.
Yeah.
Just,
If you wanna get going, I can email Wendy too.
yeah, why don't you go ahead and email her,
Sure,
and,
I have her email.
okay. We're gonna see if we can track down Wendy. And in the meantime, we have two guest speakers with us to update us on a number of issues. I'm just gonna find my agenda here. I think they're both on. So I guess we'll start with an update on the Turning Point Center. So if you can introduce Cam. Maybe you want to introduce Cam, and we can put him in as a panelist.
So this agenda item sort of came out of a conversation that I had with Cam a couple of weeks ago at this point. It stems from a letter that they sent around to city councilors and state legislators and other elected officials outlining the need that currently exists as they see it and the growth that they are looking to do. So I wanted to make sure Cam had the opportunity to give us that update here so that we're aware of that and see if there's a way for the city to sort of provide some of that support they need to expand their services. So thanks for joining us, Cam.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Just give me a thumbs up if you can. Okay, good. Thanks for having me. Sincerely grateful to be joining you, especially at this time. It appears that Chittenden County and the state of Vermont is at a critical juncture concerning housing, substance use, and mental health concerns throughout our communities. Primarily, the Turning Point Center is the sole recovery center for Chittenden County. There are 12 other recovery centers throughout the state. We are the largest in the state. We provide addiction recovery supports to individuals struggling with substance use disorder, as well as families of loved ones. So we have recovery coaching, which is one of our primary substance use recovery services, of which we've seen demand and growth higher than we've ever seen before. Sort of a backstory to get us to where we're at today and what we're experiencing. When the pandemic surfaced in Chittenden County, we closed our doors to in-person support and adapted to provide virtual and phone support throughout the county. We saw significant loss. We saw individuals die at higher rates than they ever have due to substance use and other mental health concerns. We lost contact with a lot of people. I was the former supervisor of the emergency department recovery coaching program. I continue to provide in-person support whenever that was deemed appropriate by the hospital and in line with their policies. And what I saw was the acuity of substance use increased more so due to the pandemic and the confounding factors of the pandemic and increased isolation, as well as strains placed upon the treatment system throughout the state. We saw bed waits go from 1 week to 2 weeks to 3 weeks to a month. We saw mental health capacity dwindle throughout the state for hospitalization and inpatient hospitalization. Residential programs limited their bed capacity due to COVID requirements and necessity to do so. In the meantime, it really forced us to be innovative in our services and to think differently. The first thing that we did was open our doors in November of 2020, of which we saw the need to do so and to increase accessibility to our services. Not everybody has the luxury or the understanding of how to operate technology. We've increased capacity in ways to allow for virtual accessibility, phone accessibility, and in-person support for people. The other thing was,
Sorry.
is everything okay?
Your speaker, I think.
Yes, okay, sorry about that.
Okay.
You sound good, Cam, you're okay.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, good, thank you. We opened our doors, and what we saw is that because of the emergency housing system, individuals were housed, but they were spread throughout Chittenden County without the ability to get downtown and to benefit from our services. So not only were they housed, they were isolated, and they had little access to recovery support. They had little access to treatment whenever necessary. And it really forced us to provide outreach. So we pursued a 6-month pilot project grant through ADAP, Vermont Department of Health, which was to provide low barrier recovery coaching at Harbor Place, which was one of the designated locations. And we learned that we needed to provide this service to all other emergency housing locations, hotels and motels throughout Chittenden County, throughout Burlington, South Burlington, and Colchester. In doing that, we learned so much concerning the suffering that was occurring by individuals with acute substance use and mental health concerns. We also learned that there was a significant need and demand for low barrier in-person services to be provided on site, as well as other housing agencies and providers in the community did so and did the same and developed an outreach initiative to provide their services at these various locations. At the Harbor Place location, that was our main focus. During the 6 months that we were operational and providing support, there were 0 reported overdoses at this one location. Now, seeing that, having our services accessible, individuals were able to gain access into treatment, receive support while navigating the complexities of the healthcare system, identify sober living resources and other supportive housing in the community, obtain employment, as well as rebuild relationships with their families. We focus on everything that is connected to substance use disorder, and that's life, and that's the human experience. We have built-in infrastructure to handle the capacity and the demand, but we need to grow as an organization. And what is really holding us back from growing is the financial constraints that we've encountered over the past year. Funding from the state of Vermont for a base grant was cut by about $20,000. Our employment services grant was eliminated completely. And that was providing much needed employment consultation and placement for individuals in recovery friendly workplaces. That was a grant that went on for 3 years and was eliminated with only 2 months notice to the end of the grant. We saw cuts in other grants that we received from various other sources in the community. But when faced with the demand, we need to be innovative. We need to continue to rise to the occasion because of the equitable services that can be provided to the community through the Turning Point Center, as well as in partnership. So we partnered with Champlain Housing Trust, CVOEO, Economic Services Department, ESD, COTS, all other housing agencies, and worked closely with them during the pandemic because we needed to. And that was the response as a collective from all housing agencies and healthcare providers in the community during the pandemic, because there was little response from the state in support of these initiatives. A concern moving forward, and this is something to put on the radar for all city council members and members in the community, is that when targeting these funds for ARPA, that there is funding set aside for the services that support maintaining housing for individuals. What we saw during the stay-at-home order and at these hotels and motels is that due to substance use, mental health concerns, and behavioral concerns, individuals would lose their housing because of the complexities that come with substance use. We would see them temporarily displaced, and it begins this cycle and this pattern of obtaining emergency housing, losing it after 2 weeks, and then having to go through it again. We fielded roughly 100 or so referrals to emergency housing during that time, during the past in that 6-month grant, just helping individuals navigate the system. A couple of numbers that we've seen over the past year is we provided for over 194 Chittenden County residents through our recovery coaching program, over 468 patient consults through the ED recovery coaching program, and our center has seen over 2,000 visits from recovery community members, all within this year alone. So the demand is growing, the crisis is real. I have significant concern for the acuity of the situation. Feel as if there needs to be more to assess the strain on our system, how we can support it, and how we can work as a collective. So just to reiterate, my name's Cam. I'm the executive director of the Turning Point Center of Chittenden County. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kim. I don't know if any of us have questions. I'm curious, but that the state has withdrawn funding. Are you having any more feedback from them about how at least the state ARPA money might be able to be made available?
That's a good question. That's a sort of a larger process. So we participate in statewide meetings of which they've looked at targeted funding coming through SAMHSA concerning the ARPA funding. There's significant strain that it places upon the centers for data collection when receiving funding through SAMHSA. But that's also a larger strategic targeted discussion. What's important right now is to come up with an initiative and targeted approach to secure funding for these much needed services. If we're looking at housing, it's services to help individuals maintain their housing, as well as to ease or discontinue whatever suffering that they're encountering while receiving emergency housing.
Thank you. I know there's also a discussion, and this may not be immediate, but nationally there was a big opioid settlement, and there's starting up discussions in Vermont. Are you part of that as well?
We are. The opioid settlement funding is convoluted in a way that it has to go through the Attorney General and then get approved for state distribution, of which it will get disseminated amongst all the service providers along the spectrum of addiction, which is prevention, treatment, recovery, harm reduction initiatives, to where we could be looking at that pile of money getting distributed to over 100+ different subcontractors and grantees. From my understanding, the funding that's to then be set aside for the recovery centers is not enough for growth, operations, progress, and to continue the initiatives that were started during the pandemic. I don't have any discussion on what the future of that looks like concerning the opioid settlement funding.
How many recovery centers are there in Vermont?
There are 12. There's one in each county.
Okay.
I would offer, this is Brian Pine, I'm the director at CEDO. I don't have anything, I don't have like a silver bullet or anything magic, except to say that we have people within our staff who I think are good resources to be thought partners with you about how to approach this. So let's work together. I would offer that and connect you with some staff in our office to talk about this.
Thank you, Brian. Just to add to it in what the financial picture looks like for the organization, the city of Burlington has contributed $4,500 annually to the operation costs of our organization. We provide for the majority of Burlington. If you look at the demographics breakdown of individuals receiving services through the various programs that we offer, it's a little over 400 Burlington residents, as well as temporarily unhoused residents or individuals without physical addresses. We shoulder a significant burden in supporting these individuals.
Do you get any direct contributions from any other municipalities?
We are embarking upon that discussion. Our board and our center just completed a 3-year strategic planning process, of which is discussing the financial sustainability of our organization. That is an initiative that we're looking at, and being able to provide for each municipality how many of their residents receive our services. We receive 3,500 from Essex Junction. That's going into effect FY22. And we provide for a little over 20 Essex Junction residents. There are some other complications in being able to quantify the amount of individuals that we provide for, given the confidential and low barrier nature of the work that we do. It's really only through a handful of our services that we collect personal identifiable information and can then quantify by each individual.
Great. Yes, we will connect. And Kim, hopefully you'll stay with us. We've invited Emily Higgins from AHS and DOC to talk to us about some changes in policies around transitional housing options and sober houses. And so I'm going to let her explain to us sort of their policy changes, but I'd be curious while you're still on to also have a conversation maybe among the two of you, because you had mentioned the need or how you've been able to introduce your services into congregate settings. And so there's sort of a, having done this a while ago, pros and cons of congregate settings. So I see Emily's just connecting to us and Emily's
Hi.
old housing, a former housing person, a person with a lot of housing experience. And so maybe if you could introduce yourself, Emily, and what you're working on these days.
Sure. I'm Emily Higgins. I'm the Corrections Housing Administrator for the Vermont Department of Corrections, which means that I oversee the grants to community partners to operate transitional housing programs for people re-entering the community after incarceration.
Okay, well, if you could sort of update us, one of the reasons this got brought to our attention was, of course, some press stories, and then concerns that there's been some shifts in policy supporting your clients and may or may not have left them without housing. So maybe you've had a chance to talk to Brian, and maybe you can kind of sort of step back and repeat for us and those online kind of where the department is right now.
Sure. There are a lot of good resources on the website. I don't know if there's a way to share those as I discuss them, but they are listed with the agenda on the website. The first one is called DOC Supportive Housing Materials, and it describes the Justice Reinvestment Act process that the state has been engaged in for the past few years, with assistance from the National Council for State Governments to improve our outcomes around incarceration and recidivism in Vermont. And one of the things that was identified through that initial process was that there were a high percentage, almost 80% of people under supervision on furlough were returning to incarceration due to program violations. So not necessarily for committing a new crime, but for, you know, violating a program rule of for example, a housing program. And or for minor offenses, minor violations of technical provisions of their release. So DOC has made a major shift in, number one, getting as many people out of facilities and back into the community as possible to prevent them from being incarcerated in a public health crisis where they have no ability to control their environment, and also to prevent people being sent back to incarceration for minor issues that are not actually a threat to public safety. So what we did is we looked at all our housing investments and the outcomes. We did a data analysis of the housing programs we were funding, which we hadn't recompeted for about 9 years. And we took a step back, as you said, Sarah, to say, you know, we've made these investments over time, but are they actually accomplishing the goals of the Agency of Human Services and the goals of the Department of Corrections? And we found that they were falling short, that we were not seeing as many people exiting transitional housing to permanent housing in the community as we would like. Our goals were modest to begin with. We were aiming for 60%, but we did have some programs where that was 20 or 30%. And we were seeing poor utilization, specifically of our congregate sober living environments, where
Emily, can you just explain what you said?
Yep, I was just about to.
Okay.
Yes, so congregate sober houses are buildings where there are multiple rooms, but there's a common kitchen, common living area, private bedrooms in most cases. But there are staff on site either overnight or you know, as many hours as possible. And sobriety is required as a threshold for maintaining housing. And so these were zero tolerance programs that if you were caught using or not being sober in any way, you would be immediately evicted from that housing. So that was problematic. As I said in my chat notes in response to Cam, you know, housing instability, that churn of you're here tonight, oh, you're here this other, you're on the street tonight, and oh gosh, you might go back to jail. And that kind of churn is very counterproductive to successful recovery. And so we decided to actually shift our investment to support more individualized and trauma-informed and supported more permanent housing. So there's another document on the website called Burlington Housing Statistics, and it describes the shift that we made in funding between state fiscal year 21, which we can call 2020 for ease of understanding, and state fiscal year 22, which we'll call 2021, which is what we're currently funding. So we have increased our investment in transitional housing for DOC clients in Burlington from 1.3 million to 1.5 million We have increased the number of beds we're funding in Burlington from 56, I believe, to 90. So we've made a substantial increase in available housing for those re-entering the community who are in the care of and custody of DOC. And that is even though our risk management cases, which is what our probation and parole office calls those who are likely to need intensive support when they re-enter the community, is only 18% of the statewide total in Burlington. We are now investing 33% of, we're locating 33% of the beds statewide in Burlington because we know it's a service-rich environment. Relatively, maybe not enough, but that people can come from Burlington from other communities, but we worked really hard through our process to locate housing equitably across all counties in Vermont. We added funding for transitional housing in Orange County and in Lamoille County, where we had never funded housing before. So we really tried to match the need and the data that we saw with models, housing first models that would support housing stability as the top priority. And we fund over 50 full-time equivalent staff through our housing grants statewide in order to provide intensive services to those living in housing. So that's one full-time staff person for every 5 folks who are living in our transitional housing. So it's not that we're putting people in individual apartments and saying good luck. We're checking in very regularly and making sure that they're connected to all the either mental health, substance use, employment, any other services that they need. And I know that Tia Lewis is on as well, and she is from Pathways Vermont. Pathways Vermont now has increased their funded DOC beds in Burlington to 25 from 14, and I believe most of those are already occupied. So I want to make sure Tia has a chance to talk about that. I don't know if you can make her a presenter after me.
Yep. Emily, question. You shifted from, you talked about transitional housing.
Yes.
Can you be more specific, like, are those individual apartments, you know, physically, where are these?
Sure. So we call it transitional housing. We're actually funding through Pathways apartments that could be lived in for 6 months to actually a year to 2 years or even longer on an as needed basis. And then with Burlington Housing Authority, we're actually funding 30 apartments through them that are permanent housing. Those are connected with vouchers. And those also are, we fund 2 positions now, I believe, at least in their housing retention team to ensure that those folks have the support they need to maintain their housing.
I will mention Wendy Morgan did come online to talk about Just Cause, but she's also been very involved with the VRAP program, Vermont Emergency Rental Assistance Program. And she's offered, when she comes on, we can promote her well to talk about, because that's a resource I understand it's available, and it's also available in recovery residences, I understand it, so. Tia,
Hi,
thank you for joining us, and
thank you. I want to apologize. My camera's not on it. I'm having some technical issues, but I can see all of you and I appreciate that. I am Tia Lewis. I am the Community Integration and Department of Corrections Statewide Services Manager at Pathways Vermont, where we operate out of 9 counties, one of them being Chittenden County. And as Emily said, we have 24 units in Burlington and Chittenden County already out of 25. So we're really excited about that. And the program is designed to support folks for 1 to 2 years, give or take, during which time we support them to acclimate to living in the community, being a productive member of society, on their self-identified goals, and transitioning into permanent housing after they graduate from our program. While in our program, their They have access to a pretty robust staff that includes psychiatric services, nursing services, employment, rep payee, housing, recovery, forensic peer supports, and more during their time with us to make that transition as smooth as possible and to support the individual needs of everyone.
That's great, but I guess a question I have for each or any of you is with the shortage of housing and a move away from designated congregate sites, how do you handle the more immediate needs of any Cam's clients, Emily's clients? I guess Emily's clients won't get released until they have a
With-
spot.
With Pathways, we rent the units from the property owner and then we sublet to the tenants. So if there is that turnover, the unit is still available to other folks, which is really great. And we have over 80 already established landlord resources in the community. We already have 80 established landlord relationships in that community. And we've been around practicing housing first in Vermont for 11 years. So we've definitely established ourselves in that community.
I will also say that the Department of Corrections continues to fund sober houses, congregate sober houses, mainly through Dismiss of Vermont. There are now 5 Dismiss houses throughout the state, 2 in Chittenden County, 1 in Winooski, which has served a lot of people, and also the one in Burlington. And Dismiss has worked really closely with the Department of Corrections to adjust some of their policies and processes to make them more trauma informed and to prevent releases to homelessness. And they're working really closely with us on that. So we still offer that option of sober congregate living if that's what is going to work for somebody at that point in their recovery process. So that's at least 20% of our statewide portfolio still.
Ken, any thoughts or?
One of the major issues that we're seeing is that not everybody is suitable for a congregate sober living environment. Oftentimes could be working through a recurrence, observing harm reduction, of which there are still individuals in recovery. They just need that extra leg up. They need that extra support. They still need help navigating the various systems that they're encountering. You know, you think of the individuals with chronic substance use disorder, going into a recovery residence might be unattainable, as well as it might not be the appropriate next step for them.
Exactly. That's why we funded Pathways and Burlington Housing Authority, because they embrace a housing recovery model. And if people slip up on their recovery journey, they don't lose their housing. They keep working toward recovery with support.
That's
Exactly,
great.
Emily. We offer those intensive community-based supports and we meet people where they're at. So we're there with them through their celebrations and their struggles. They're, you know, if they need that additional extra support, we do have the staff to provide it, and to provide it in a way that best meets their needs, whether it's getting them into a facility, a rehab, or if they need to do it at home, to work through whatever it is that they're experiencing at home.
Wendy now joined us. Wendy wears many hats and she and I go back a long way, but Wendy is with Vermont Legal Aid and is one of their chief legislative liaisons. And so before we go to just cause addiction, Wendy, I don't know if you want to, she's been very integral in getting the VRAP program up and running, and actually has also been working on legislation around recovery houses. So maybe you want to update us on that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. I'm happy to be here, and I'm really happy to hear how much is happening in the recovery residences and with DOC. I've been aware from the outside more that DOC has made some huge changes in the last couple of years, and I think it's just tremendous that's happening. What I want to be sure everybody knows about is that under the what's called the administrative plan, which is the rules for VRAP, which is the Vermont Emergency Rental Assistance Program, which is a lot of the federal dollars. It was originally CRF, now it's ERA. That people renting in recovery residences or sober homes, as well as renting temporary housing if they relapse and cannot stay in the residence, provided their rental amounts can be paid for under VRAP. And they have now asked for a new addition, they being the Vermont State Housing Authority, which implements VRAP, have now asked for another expansion of that for transitional housing, including but not limited to recovery residences that from the Department of Corrections. And the rental period, if you fall into certain rules, then all of that can get funded. And I just don't know if that's generally known in the recovery residence world or in like CAM's world, which probably covers both recovery residences and more individual situations, that there are these funds that are available. And frankly, I think the more we can take advantage of them now, the better. People who could have their rent covered, maybe what they would have paid in their rent can be saved for them for when they go into independent housing, when they leave the recovery residence. So I think there are ways to really utilize these funds in a way that's beneficial for the tenants.
Wendy, I haven't followed this too closely, but I understand there's a lot of technical stuff with the federal government and the vendor administering it, and we've been sort of slow getting it out the door. Is that fair to say? And
It's definitely fair to say. I don't know if anybody else here has had to deal with trying to apply for VRAP, but it is difficult. There are community organizations that are helping people apply, and Vermont Legal Aid is helping a lot of people apply or helping them overcome difficulties if the community partners aren't able to get through the system. They are making changes now. We hope it will get better. It is getting better slowly but surely, but it's not nearly as quick as any of us would have hoped, given the amount of money that's available.
in Chittenden County Champlain Housing Trust, one of those partners,
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that they are assisting people. But sometimes you get roadblocks and the community partners aren't able to get through, and we have a more direct route to plead someone's case and try to change the policies that are causing stumbling blocks or the procedures that are causing stumbling blocks. So I'd be curious if you have the time. I have no idea what your entire agenda looks like, but I'd be curious to hear from Cam or others about whether or not people are using VRAP to help with the rental part of housing folks who are in recovery.
My understanding concerning Chittenden County is that there's a presence of Vermont Foundation of Recovery residences, and I believe that they would be the ones who would work with their membership to apply and work to secure that funding. Typically what we see is immediate triage and support for individuals, regardless of their housing. If they're temporarily unhoused, if they're currently housed. We specialize on individual recovery services and work to provide access to resources in the community. It's really just directing them in the right path and illustrating what that path looks like and educating them on what next steps might be for them. But I believe if Vermont Foundation of Recovery, if they're the ones providing the housing, it might be best that they're made aware of this support.
And you're talking about V4 run by Dave Regal?
Yes,
Yeah,
and
I've talked to
also
him.
I believe they partner with Champlain Housing Trust.
Right, he works there. Yeah, well, I would ask you to add it to your list of resources that people can think about utilizing.
Excellent.
I will
That,
say, Wendy, that in our Housing First program and in our DOC program, we have supported many, many, many people across the state with utilizing the VRAP funds. So thank you for that.
Great,
They've
great,
been
thank you.
invaluable to a lot of households.
Great. So if you get really stuck, let us know. We'd be happy.
Absolutely. I will call you directly.
Thank you.
I
I'll
also
pass
see
you on.
Sandrine from CDOEO. Sandrine is commenting that they too will assist
Right.
clients with applying for VRAP, and she's also commented that it's difficult, but I think the concern is to get the word out and have people start applying and try to support them if they have the difficulties, because it's a substantial amount of money.
Yeah.
It's quite a generous program, actually, but it's hard to use. It's hard to use and it's not going to last forever.
And there's also lots of money for landlords to upgrade units and that kind of thing as well. Aside from VHIP, there's VRAP can do a lot on the health and safety front. And that's not very well known and it's not very well advertised yet on their website. But that's another place that any landlords you're working with that maybe need to bring something up to code, there's money there.
That is good to know. I know that Emily wanted to step back a bit and talk about a few things that are guiding some of their policy changes.
Sort of talk about that theory of change that you and I talked about, Emily. Yeah.
Sure. Yes. I thought I was done presenting, so I added a long comment with a in the chat with a link to our website where our theory of change can be found. But essentially, we engaged in a process that was initiated with the AHS, the Agency of Human Services. Shoot, now I'm blanking on her title, Performance Improvement Director, to really articulate the goals and the reasoning behind the goals of how we wanted to change transitional housing over the past couple of years. And that was created in the summer of 2020. That's posted on our website for review. We reviewed that with all of our community partners, with all of our AHS housing partners, and got a lot of feedback from various agencies and within DOC and throughout AHS and field services, et cetera. We distributed as widely as we possibly could. And then we included that change theory in our public request for proposals that we issued in January of last year. Can't keep track of the years anymore. I think it was January 2021 actually, but and that was an open, publicly available application process that we went through to sort of very clearly state what our intentions were and ask for any organizations to apply for that funding. So just wanted to be clear that it wasn't it wasn't a sudden or unexpected shift. We were very public and transparent about the process, and there was a lot of press about it. We testified, as I said in the notes, in front of various legislative committees. So just wanted to provide that context. I don't know that we'll have time to go through the whole theory of change, but it basically said, you know, what I said before, we don't want to participate in having our transitional housing make recidivism worse. We want the opposite. We want our housing to help really and truly stabilize people in the community.
Seems like, and we're not going to certainly have time tonight, but to you all providers, there still needs to be an ongoing conversation about the value or not of congregate settings and the needs, because for certain people, I think having camaraderie is a good thing. And then, you know, at what point is it traumatic if you have to ask somebody to leave? And so, you know, in terms of housing resources, sort of a double-edged sword, but, you know, not all things fit all people. We need all kinds of options, and that's,
Yeah.
I guess, my advice of the day, certainly to the state, is let's not have one size fits all, because I think that will be important.
Absolutely not. And that's why we've maintained a continuum of different types of housing options. We have congregate sober houses that we fund. We have apartments where multiple people live in different rooms. We have apartments where people live on their own. So we have a range of choices, a lot more choices than we used to have. And there's a new sober house in Rutland that Dismiss stood up in partnership with the local Turning Point Center there, which is a beautiful, beautiful location. I just had the privilege of touring that. And that's in partnership with the local affordable housing agency as well. So there are a lot of great options throughout the state, and we're definitely not seeing this as a one size fits all. But we did look at performance, we looked at outcome measures, we looked at utilization, and these decisions were really necessary and very clearly indicated by the cross-agency group of reviewers of 6 different people who reviewed each individual application and scored them. So these were not made lightly, and they were evidence-based and data-informed decisions.
Sure, go ahead.
Emily, after I spoke with you, I talked with a person who previously operated a private sober house, I'll call it, a recovery house. And she indicated that the business model is extremely challenging, and that whole notion of privately run homes is kind of challenging. And I don't know if that means that in the rest of the state they're closing, but she indicated that she finally closed because she couldn't break even, basically, was the issue, even though she had a day job and this facility. I'm just wondering if that means that resource is sort of, if it's no longer going to be viable, look like that's the case, that those small kind of privately operated homes are super challenging to operate?
Oh, I don't think it's in my purview to answer that question on behalf of the state. I certainly don't have the expertise. I do know that nationally, the science and the housing policy work does favor supportive housing that is stable, that is housing first and trauma informed. And that's what we've been working hard to support at the Department of Corrections.
In what I've noticed over the past 2 years concerning the relationship between individuals struggling with substance use, individuals seeking housing, and then individuals striving to obtain recovery residence, that the amount of beds in the county is really a small percentage of individuals struggling with substance use or living with substance use. That although, you know, we have a continuum of recovery residences, congregate, non-congregate, Department of Corrections affiliated, I think that's amazing. You know, that sounds like wonderful progress, and that there's also financial support, which was a significant barrier for people just to get started in a recovery residence. That we also want to ensure that there is still a large population, subset of the population of individuals receiving emergency housing in Chittenden County that are left without the supports, without the access to the services, unless those services are funded to help them progress, to help them maintain their housing too.
Absolutely. DOC is only responsible for supporting those in our care and custody, and that's what we're doing. and that is a population who are experiencing significant challenges with recovery and mental health, but by no means is it the whole picture, and that is not a problem that DOC can solve as a department, and it's a bigger, much bigger problem for the state than any one department can tackle. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. Thank you, Cam.
Just have one short question, kind of builds off of what Cam was saying there. I know that AHS was also providing some funding for the sober houses that closed recently, and so I'm curious if DOC has been working with AHS on, kind of pulling those resources and pursuing the same sort of investments that you all have pursued over the last couple of years, or if that has been a separate discussion, and if that is sort of in limbo at this point.
Sure. I guess what I can say is that there is an Agency of Human Services Housing Task Force of the various departments in the agency who do fund housing, and we do have these conversations. And at the time that Phoenix House closed at the end of November, we had not been funding them for since the end of June. So we were not notified of the closure. We found out about it through actually the local probation and parole office, not through Phoenix House, not through their funder, the alcohol and drug abuse prevention program that was supporting their services when they closed. So I think there's room for improvement. I think housing more than ever needs to be a focus for the agency, and I think there's more we could be doing there. Speaking as an individual, not on behalf of the agency.
Sure. Thank you.
I want to acknowledge, I think Representative Tiff Bloomley is on, just listening in. She sits on the Legislative Housing Committee, and she and I have had talks offline about this, and the disconnect, I think, at times between the service side and the housing side. And that's just a comment that we've got more work to do. Thank you all. I don't know if we have any more comments or questions for these folks. We've got work to
Cam
do.
does.
Just one final comment. Just reflecting on my experience in doing this work over the past year, the relationships that we've built with partnering organizations is extremely precious. Us being asked to step up, to rise to the occasion, working with Pathways, COTS, CHT, CVOEO, in seeing the earnest efforts and the compassion that they bring to the individuals that they provide for, the willingness to be innovative. That is something that's important, that must continue as we address these issues at its core. And again, just want to put it on the radar that the pandemic really forced us to work closer. I think it was the first time I've seen VDH, ESD, housing, recovery support services, recovery residencies sitting at the same table and having a conversation about how to support these individuals. So again, just putting it out there. It's been great to see this grow.
Thank you. Still got a lot of work to do, but thank you. Thank you for keeping us up to date, and through Brian and his office, please keep us informed. Okay, we'll circle back. I had invited Wendy just to give us a quick update because obviously one of the issues we continue to have are people using their housing and often to no fault of their own. And as we discussed a little bit earlier, Burlington has a pending charter change on just cause eviction. And Wendy, maybe you can kind of let us know what you've been seeing statewide and what you think you might be trying to propose quickly, temporarily to the legislature?
Sure. So first I want to say that we support the Burlington charter change. Obviously, that's going to be led by people from Burlington and RAD in particular, but we are supportive of that and sort of consider it a companion bill to the bill that we hope the legislature will take up and support. Originally, we had not thought that we would get into the just cause eviction discussion this year because, you know, Burlington charter change is probably going to be quite a bit of a discussion, and it's not in the housing committee, it's in a different committee, GovOps. But then as we started looking at all the cases that are being filed in court now, we found that we really need to bring this to the attention of the legislature. And let me just back up and say that Vermont Legal Aid got a grant to help people with rental assistance and in particular, people who have court cases, eviction cases that are going on, with the hope that the money from VRAP would solve those cases. And when we were working last year under the CRF dollars, it was a much more flexible program and we were able to do much more quickly with that money. And by and large, even if landlords had filed for cause evictions, money was helpful to getting rid of the evictions, no question. We're seeing less of that now, and we're seeing a lot more of the no cause evictions being filed. So a couple of years ago, when Jessica Radbourne did a report looking at what were the bases of evictions, at that point in time, this was pre-pandemic, about 70% of the evictions filed were for non-payment. And of the 18% of that remaining 30 were for no cause. Now, no cause is more than 50% of the filings that we're seeing. So there's been a huge shift there. And, I don't know if landlords became more aware of no cause or they became fed up with the situation of having had an eviction moratorium and they just want out. But it is much more difficult for our staff to settle cases than it has been in the past. And at the same time, the amount of housing that's available has plummeted. So, and landlords understandably want to be paid, but they also wouldn't mind increasing their rents. Often that's one of the reasons for going for no cause eviction, is to be able to increase your rents and not take money from VRAP, because I think landlords mistakenly think they can never increase the rents if they take money from VRAP, when in fact there are provisions for landlords to be able to increase the rent during the time that they're receiving money for tenants who are receiving VRAP. So that's all to say, we decided that we really wanted to encourage the legislature to look at a temporary moratorium on no cause evictions because of the big increase in no cause evictions and the serious decrease in available housing. So the bill, which is being considered by a number of people, and one of whom apparently is listening to this now, Representative Blumley, would provide for a temporary period for stay on no cause evictions. And that would run until probably June 30, 23. Obviously, these are proposals and the legislature will decide whatever it will decide. There's also a provision for limiting the increases in rents. I don't know how that's going to come out in terms of what gets proposed, but we have found that there is a lot of large increases in rents being considered by landlords. And so we have concerns about that because people won't be able to stay if the rent increases is too much. There are also provisions for requiring in any eviction case certain notices to go to tenants about the VRAP program, and also for the case to be stayed if a tenant shows that they've applied and they just haven't gotten through the system yet because anybody involved in this knows it's a very, it's not a quick result. But let me say in that regard that it's quicker for the court cases because that is a priority for processing applications. So hopefully there wouldn't be too much delay there. We're not looking for delay. We're looking for payment to the landlords. And then there are two other parts of the legislation that involve similar notices and stays of proceedings for foreclosure. Because as soon as Vermont Housing Finance Agency is able to start their program, their homeownership assistance program, there will be money for mortgage payments and also for property taxes. So there's a provision for staying tax sales and redemption periods so people can apply for the money that hopefully will be available in January under the homeownership assistance program. So that's all I came to you with.
Well, because we're following on a parallel, I just want to make everyone aware that of this effort, and I'm glad you also brought up the VHFA program, which people may not be as aware of for foreclosures, and we're anxiously trying to follow that as well. And I know they would have liked to have started yesterday, but they're still held up with apparently some federal approvals, but.
Yeah, Treasury hasn't come back to them. But they're ready to go as far as I can tell. As soon as Treasury says, okay.
I'm just curious, Wendy, is there a place to see sort of the outline of the proposal of the temporary moratorium?
There's no bill that's released at this point in time. If you're sort of looking for the bullets that I gave you, I mean, I could develop that or some variation on that theme, but there's nothing posted anywhere about it.
I would be interested in having the council potentially consider a letter similar to our people waiving factors letter that we sent last week.
And I keep in touch with Wendy on several things, and I shared with both Wendy and Tiff has our representative who has our legislation, and so you have a proposal to be drafted and it's probably in the queue, is that where you're
Yeah,
at?
exactly. It's under discussion and not yet released.
Okay.
You're familiar with that situation, Sarah.
Legislative.
A little bit.
So it's a, I don't want to say complex, but it's all driven by the requests and the legislators themselves. But let's keep it up on our tip of our head here, and hopefully probably will come out in early January.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. But I mean, I could send you the concept so that you could agree to the concepts if you would like that. Support the
Yeah, I think, learning myself through the legislative process, it would be good for us to get in there early and hopefully throw a little bit of weight behind the drafting request so that we're, given the urgency here.
Right. And it is time limited. I mean, frankly, legal aid would love it if the state would go just cause only statewide, but that's a big lift in the Vermont legislature. And we just felt the urgency now given the vacancy rate.
Sure.
And so.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We're doing well on time, and that's good because I've got something else to go to, but I don't know if we have other issues on this. I put a fairly open-ended item on the agenda really for Councilor McGee and Director Pine, and I had hoped Councilor Hightower to just sort of briefly talk about, we full front and center know that there's a lot of issues and concerns around houseless encampments for houseless folks, and we obviously saw that with Sears Lane. So the question of the day is, how do we begin approaching it? And I see it kind of in two buckets. We have a current encampment policy, and I was gonna ask Brian to kind of just give us a little bit of background on that. So the question is that still adequate? Should that group be reconvened to relook at it? Or a similar group? So I'm just sort of looking for thoughts on that. And then kind of parallel to that, and for those of you who did not see, there was, the city came out with a really good, I think, announcement on a variety of housing programs that we intend to fund and tackle. And so within it, maybe Brian can even, just for the audience, give us a quick update. There is a press release out there, it's a 10-point plan, but in particular, there's a couple of initiatives for the house list that we're gonna try to adopt quickly, presuming we approve it. And just again, for the audience's knowledge, I talked to Brian about our meeting on the 20th potentially being a hearing or a fuller discussion on how the city can use its ARPA money for serving the houseless. And Todd Rollins is doing some of that work and so we need to shape that meeting, but it's my intent, if you and Councilor Hightower agree, to sort of focus that 20th meeting on some of those issues. And I'm just trying to kind of get some feedback from Chief of Staff and you on how to go next.
Yeah, I have the unique position of being on the committee that discussed the encampment policy, but the work had begun before I got on that. It was the Public Safety Committee. When I got elected to the council in 2018, it was before the committee already, and a fair amount of work had been done. And it was really sort of a collaborative effort with a bit of involvement from Vermont ACLU. It was in response to a lawsuit they filed because of they felt that the city's practice of clearing encampments that were, basically the policy used to be, not written, if people were camping on public property and no one made an issue of it, and there were no police calls or fire calls, they were left alone until it became an issue. That was sort of how the city dealt with it. And this is true for all mayors, by the way. So Bob Kiss cleared encampments, Mayor Weinberger cleared encampments, Peter Clavell cleared encampments, Bernie Sanders had to clear some encampments. So this has been done in different ways over the last 40 years, really. So the policy that was developed in 2018 was homeless advocates, folks who'd experienced homelessness themselves, folks who'd lived in encampments were involved, and the City Council Public Safety Committee, with a very close involvement from the city attorney, developed that policy. It was, I don't believe, ever adopted as a formal city policy by the City Council. I think it was essentially a drafted policy. They took some feedback, and it was agreed that this was a good sort of balanced approach. So that's the history I have. I don't have it. I just looked for it. I probably could spend a little more time digging for it, but I don't have it right now. So I think if you were decided to go down this path of revisiting it, maybe looking at examples of other communities that have such policies, that would be, that would be an activity that, could perhaps be a productive approach to look at other communities as examples, see if ours is, still meets your goals as a council. I think I can't speak for the administration because we haven't discussed this at all. But I think the city attorney's office would want to be involved, make sure that the city could effectively enforce it. It's practical.
I can just give a quick update on sort of how I've been going through the process over the last 3 or 4 weeks of having meetings with Sears Lane campers, advocates, and a number of other folks in the community. You know, just talking about the policy, sort of the way it was implemented in the context of Sears Lane, and you know, how the ways in which it might have fallen short. And so I think what I sort of landed on is what you're getting at, Brian, in terms of policy never having really made it to the full council for a vote to actually adopt that as a city policy, and having it live in this sort of draft state created some inconsistency and gray area that I think probably wasn't very helpful for residents. And so my hope is to examine this policy through a longer term process that I think just bringing it before the full council and having an up or down vote on it. But having it go through a process where we can ultimately pass it through the full council and have it on the books as a city ordinance that has those protections built into this city ordinance. So that's kind of where I'm at right now, and I don't really see it coming in the next meeting or two, but you know, maybe our second meeting in January for a first reading to then be referred so that we can have further conversations on it. And so some of the elements that I think would be helpful for us to look at is if we identify a piece of city property where we say we don't want to allow folks to camp, seek shelter there, that we do offer alternative sites where folks can seek that shelter, just acknowledging the fact that that sort of no barrier option is always going to be an element of our response to houselessness. I think, and those are sort of the foundational pieces that I'm looking at that I don't think the current policy has in it right now. And so those are some of the things that I need to look to add as sort of red line changes to it before we start to have this larger conversation. So that's my long-winded effort at summarizing the conversations that I've had over the last month or so around this. So.
We haven't discussed it. Councilor Paul, who happens to be chair of the Public Safety Committee, knows we're talking about this, and I don't, you know, whether, I think she's fine with having us, if it's this committee, take more of a lead. I think they've got 151 things from the CNA report to deal with. So I just.
Are either of you on the public safety committee?
Soraya is, I believe.
So there is precedent for two committees coming together to work together and to ensure that you consider all the issues.
And that would
bring it
probably make
forward,
some sense.
And that would be 5 of you because Soraya sits on both.
So maybe a joint committee meeting kind of wedged in here sometime would actually make some sense.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
get the city attorney's office as well. So maybe we can target something
Sure.
soon in January.
Not looking to add much to anybody's plate before the holidays.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
So if you want it, I think you were both there, it's
Yeah.
Sarah spoke, Joe, you were there, but just for members of the public, I could go through what the announcement included today. And I do have to read from notes because otherwise I will miss some stuff. Rather than give the preamble, I would say that this announcement that occurred today with a number of partners present to express their not just support, but sort of to say what part of the effort they're going to work on, included, sort of two high-level goals or commitments, I should say. One is to double our housing production over the next 5 years, and to end chronic homelessness in Burlington by the end of 2024. So that's a sort of a 3-year from now goal. I will talk a little bit about the items that were listed in this sort of 10 initiatives that fall under this action plan to invest at least $5 million of the ARPA funds, that's the recovery money, with at least $1 million designated for initiatives to better serve the chronically homeless, and $4 million to build new permanently affordable housing. Second item, create a special assistant and homelessness position within CEDO to provide a single point of accountability for expanded community effort. Strengthen through new investments in the Chittenden and Chittenden counties coordinated entry, and to create a command center team that drives weekly progress towards functional zero. That is a term that is used by folks at the national level around functional zero of homelessness, with a comprehensive real-time by name data effort. So that is sort of similar to the way the city approached the opioid issue, with real specific focus on individuals experiencing the trauma of opiate addiction, or in this case, homelessness, with that focus for homelessness. So that's a parallel kind of effort. Support the creation of 78 new homes for formerly homeless residents, which is 25% of the goal for all the new permanently affordable housing in Burlington by partnering with affordable housing developers and service providers. Invest in up to 30 shelter pods and related infrastructure to create a new low barrier facility for 2022. Set a goal to support the creation of 1,250 total new homes that includes 312 permanently affordable homes by the end of 2026. So we're sort of signing on to the Building Homes Together campaign, which is regional, and saying we as 25% of Chittenden County's population in Burlington, so we're going to take 25% of that county goal. Fully funding the Housing Trust Fund, something that Councilor Carpenter and I have worked on since day one when it started. We had a penny for housing back in 1989, and we convinced the voters it was the right thing to do. And now we got support from them in 2020. Because of COVID, we skipped it for the last 2 fiscal years and didn't fully fund it. The proposal is to fully fund, which would bring in a little over $500,000 of city money to Housing Trust Fund, which is a significant increase. Right now, it normally generates around 200, 220 with the tax rate that was applied to it previously. Opening up new housing opportunities through the creation of a mixed-use enterprise innovation district in a portion of the south end. Opening new on-campus University of Vermont student housing opportunities by rezoning the former Trinity campus to reduce UVM's pressure on the local housing market, and open new housing opportunities citywide through what's termed as the missing middle zoning reforms, which is a term that I don't think says much because most people don't know what that really means. But the idea is that this is for folks who are just earning a little too much to qualify, I think, for affordable housing, but they're not able to go out and buy a home. So that's I think with the idea, which will expand opportunities for new homes to be created in every neighborhood in Burlington in ways that reflect the character of these parts of our city. So those are the items. Each of those we could spend a lot of time on, but I won't do that.
Well, as I understand it, in the context, I mean, each individual will be brought to us for varied approvals as. So, I don't know if we got any other issues. I think we're gonna be talking about proposals around encampment, and this, it sounds like we need to sort of pull together a focus meeting on that sometime after the new year. And see where we can take it. I did see one flash up there, somebody inquiring or mentioning the concept of safe parking, and I know you mentioned that as well. Is that something you're working on, or is that something, how you know?
Yeah, sure. The safe parking concept, for those who aren't familiar with it, is that the municipality, the city would have an area that's designated as you can park here overnight, you can certainly leave your vehicle here, and it would ideally include some services like a bathroom and a place to plug in for electricity.
Yeah.
So all of that is sort of to be determined about location and, you know, how many spaces and all of that, but it's in discussion. Our office with the Parks and Recreation and Waterfront Office Department is looking at the models out there for how other cities are doing this.
Okay. A lot of housing today.
Yeah, the problem is huge, the challenges are huge, but the need is so massive. So.
And keep trying to bring sort of the conversation back around making sure that we're talking also about, you know, having substance use treatment center in this conversation and houselessness, as well as the mental health side of things as well. So, and another piece of our addressing the housing crisis is our stagnating wages as well. I don't think we're really ever going to catch up to the problem unless we're able to address that.
The other side of the equation.
Sort of a futile effort unless we're able to lift a lot of people out of into being able to afford market rate housing. So
There's one other initiative that I should just mention. The council just approved it on consent, and that's the home ARP, which is HUD's way of not saying ARPA for some reason. So I don't know why they call it that. Just to confuse you, it's home ARP.
yeah.
And it's a pot of money that we get as a grant, formula grant. Comes out to about $1.2 million after we've covered all the costs of administering it. And that money, we have to go through a process of consulting with the community stakeholders. We've begun that process. You all will be talking about it in January, but I want to just highlight that there's no design on that money. The mayor has not said it will be spent this way or that way. It is really to be determined what is the most effective way to address, and it really is focused on homelessness. But you can use it because it lasts. We have the ability to use this money over an 8-year period, which is extremely unusual.
Yeah.
It can be used to fund services. We don't usually use these kind of dollars for services because it's capital money. You need units to put people in before you worry about the services. You need units. So I don't have an answer, and I'm not going to suggest to you what I think is better. But services are an option here because we have an 8-year funding period, that's a longer runway than we ever have.
So our next meeting is the 20th.
Yeah, so our next meeting is the 20th, and I had said to Brian that we could use that as at least a chunk of it for this discussion, and maybe a more generalized discussion on the use. I mean, we have a program, and we have some proposals, but sort of what else do we want to be doing with the ARPA houseless?
Will it be a public hearing on the whole of the survey or?
No, actually, this would be just on the home ARP,
Yeah,
right? That's the focus.
yeah.
That's $1.2 million, and it's we want to kind of get it going before.
What is I think that's a longer timeframe.
That's later, right? That would occur perhaps after the town hall meeting, which is end of January, 27th of January, so a week later. In town hall.
Yes, so we're having a public
Yeah.
meeting already on that, and then I think once it's, and I think we have presumed that that is the target because we are being told the preliminary results really indicate that's the highest priority with people.
Yes.
But I think if that's not been 100% decided, and there will be other things
Right.
as
The
well.
good news is with the infrastructure bill, that the lake cleanup issues are dealt with by that, so we don't need to tap into the ARPA. And Megan Moore has confirmed that, while she would love to get some of the ARPA funds, that other funds will be available to do that kind of work.
Cascading funds of money. Not usually,
Yeah, usual.
Okay. Really.
okay.
Take a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, second. Great, thank you. I'll talk to, well, we can talk offline, but I'll.
I keep track of all the comments.